After 1971, money began behaving like a system. It didn't just sit still, it moved, it flowed, and most people were never taught how that flow worked. Money now traveled through channels, banks, markets, governments, institutions, long before it ever reached wages or savings accounts. By the time it arrived, its value had already changed, not because someone stole it, but because the system moved first. Under the old rules, time was neutral. You worked, you saved, you waited. Time rewarded patience. Under the new rules, time became an active force. Money lost value while you waited. Opportunities moved faster than income. Standing still became expensive. People didn't suddenly become worse with money. Time simply stopped playing fair. This is why two people can put in the same effort, make similar choices, and still end up in very different places depending on when they were born. The same job in different decades produces different outcomes. The same discipline leads to different results. The same advice works for one generation and fails for another. Nothing about effort changed. The environment did. When money expands faster than wages, time stops being a neutral background. It becomes a silent variable. Waiting carries a cost. Delay becomes a disadvantage. And patience, once a virtue, quietly turns into risk. Most people don't notice this shift consciously. They just feel pressure. They feel like they're late, like they missed something, like stability is always slightly out of reach. And because the system never explains itself, that pressure feels personal. Once money no longer needed a physical anchor, debt took its place. Debt became the mechanism that expanded money, not as a problem, but as fuel. Governments borrowed to grow, companies borrowed to scale, households borrowed to keep up. Debt wasn't a sign of failure, it was how the system stayed alive. And the more debt the system carried, the more fragile it became, and the harder it was to slow down. In the old system, stability was normal. In the new system, stability became something you had to buy. You needed assets to protect yourself. You needed exposure to growth. You needed risk just to stay in place. Safety was no longer the default. It became exclusive. And that's why anxiety quietly entered everyday life, even when nothing seemed wrong on the surface. When money expands through debt, the system needs constant motion. Slowdowns become dangerous. Pauses become threats. So when things wobble, the response is always the same: more liquidity, lower rates, bigger interventions, not to save people, but to keep the system moving. Crises no longer reset the system, they reinforce it. People are often told they made the wrong choices. They didn't save enough. They didn't invest early enough. They didn't take enough risk. But choices only matter inside the rules. And most people never chose the rules. They were born into them. Once you see the system clearly, something changes. You stop blaming individuals, but you also stop believing in simple answers. There's no villain to defeat, no switch to flip, just a structure that rewards certain positions and ignores others. That realization doesn't make you cynical, it makes you precise. This was never explained clearly because complex systems don't survive transparency. They survive familiarity. As long as money looked the same, people assumed it worked the same. And questioning money felt unnecessary until it didn't. The decision made in 1971 wasn't evil. It solved real problems. It allowed flexibility. It prevented immediate collapse. It bought time, but it traded stability for expansion. And once that trade was made, there was no going back. For decades, the system could grow faster than its consequences. Today, those consequences are visible, not as a single disaster, but as pressure everywhere. Housing, healthcare, education, security. The system is still working. It's just asking more from everyone inside it. And here's the part most people never hear. Once a system is built around expansion, slowing down isn't just uncomfortable, it becomes dangerous. Each cycle requires more debt than the last. Each intervention must be larger than the one before, not because leaders want it that way, but because stopping would expose how dependent the system has become on motion itself. Growth stops being a goal. It becomes a requirement. And when growth becomes mandatory, sustainability becomes optional. At that point, the system no longer asks whether something should continue, only whether it can continue a little longer. That's why everything starts to feel financialized. Homes stop being places to live. Education stops being preparation for life. Healthcare stops being about health. Each becomes a financial vehicle, not intentionally, Inevitably, because when money must keep moving, it looks for places to park. And everyday life becomes one of them. Many people feel like they're running faster just to stay in place. They upgrade skills. They change jobs. They follow advice. Yet security feels further away. That feeling isn't personal failure. It's what happens when effort operates inside a system where outcomes depend more on structure than participation. You can play the game perfectly and still feel exhausted. If money had collapsed loudly, people would have reacted, but it didn't. It changed quietly, technically, almost politely. That's why the dominant emotion today isn't anger, it's confusion. People don't know what went wrong, only that the old rules no longer seem to apply. And systems survive confusion far better than resistance. When you don't see the system, you personalize its outcomes. You blame yourself. You blame others. You chase explanations that don't quite fit. But once you recognize that money is no longer neutral, that it actively shapes behavior and rewards position, something shifts. The noise fades. Patterns appear. Understanding the system doesn't give you control over it, but it changes your relationship to it. You stop expecting fairness where none exists. You stop mistaking stability for safety. You stop confusing motion with progress. And that quiet, internal, irreversible shift is the real legacy of 1971. Because once money became a system, everyone living inside it became part of its logic, whether they knew it or not. 1971 wasn't an accident. It wasn't a crisis moment. It wasn't a collapse. It was a quiet turn. From that point forward, money became a tool of systems, not a mirror of reality. And if money follows systems, then understanding systems matters more than understanding money. Once you see that shift, the past makes sense, the present feels clearer, and the future stops being confusing. You don't have to agree with it, you don't have to like it, but you can't unsee it. And once you do, you can't unsee it. In 1971, something changed. There was no crash, no panic, no collapse. Most people didn't even notice, but money has never worked the same since. For most of modern history, money followed a quiet rule. You didn't need to understand it. You didn't need to think about it, but it was there. Money wasn't just numbers on paper or digits on a screen. It was anchored to something outside the system itself. That anchor rarely appeared in daily life. People went to work. They saved. They planned. And the system felt stable. Then in 1971, that anchor was removed, not gradually, not after long public debate, but with a single announcement. Nothing dramatic followed. Banks stayed open, stores stayed stocked, paychecks still arrived, life looked the same, and that's precisely why almost no one reacted. But beneath the surface, something subtle began to shift. Wages kept rising, but more slowly than before. Prices started moving differently. Assets, houses, stocks, land began drifting away from everyday income. At first, the gap was small, barely noticeable, but year after year, that distance grew. People worked more, saved longer, and still felt further behind. The strange part was that nothing felt obviously connected. Each problem looked isolated, so no one connected the pieces. But when you do connect them, a very different picture appears. The problem wasn't inflation alone. It wasn't greedy corporations. It wasn't irresponsible consumers. The rules of money itself had changed, but its name hadn't. The dollar still looked the same. Prices still had familiar numbers. Paychecks still arrived with symbols people recognized. Yet beneath the surface, money was now operating under an entirely new logic. Before 1971, money needed restraint. After 1971, it didn't. Before, growth had limits. After, expansion became the system, not overnight, but permanently. And once you see that shift, everything else starts to make sense. In August of 1971, the United States ended the last remaining link between money and gold. With that single decision, money stopped being constrained by something outside itself. It became something created through policy, debt, and confidence. From that moment on, money could grow faster than production, faster than wages, faster than the real economy. Not because of corruption, not because of conspiracy, but because the system now allowed it. This wasn't a mistake. It was a design choice. And like most quiet design choices, its consequences didn't arrive all at once. When rules change quietly, effects arrive slowly. The years immediately after 1971 felt normal. Inflation rose, then fell. Markets adjusted, but the real shift wasn't chaos. It was direction. Money began flowing toward assets instead of labor, toward leverage instead of saving, toward scale instead of stability. Those closest to new money felt it first. Those furthest away felt it last. By the time most people sensed something was wrong, the system was already locked in. Over the decades that followed, the same pattern repeated again and again. Assets rose faster than income. Homes became investments instead of shelter. Stocks became necessities instead of opportunities. Debt became normal. This didn't happen because people suddenly changed. The rules did. When money expands without a natural anchor, it doesn't spread evenly. It concentrates. Those who own assets benefit first. Those who rely on wages fall behind, not because they're lazy, not because they made bad choices, but because the system rewards position, not effort. Under the old rules, saving made sense. Money held value over time. Patience was rewarded. Under the new system, saving became fragile. Money lost purchasing power slowly, then faster. Returns shifted toward risk. Stability became expensive. Doing the right thing no longer guaranteed safety. People felt that shift long before they could explain it. That's why so many say money feels fake today. They aren't imagining it. Money is no longer tied to work the way it once was. Time doesn't translate into security the way it used to. Effort and outcome drift apart. The system still functions. It just follows incentives most people were never taught to see. And once money stops needing limits, everything else starts needing explanation. Before 1971, money behaved like an object. It could be saved. It could be earned. It could be lost.